Whoa, all four wheels off the ground there in the old dolly. Driving lights nosed into the ground a bit there.
Right on. This is wrong. Okay.
Welcome to another episode of restoring this Triumph Dolomite Sprint rally car. And what's going to happen today? Well, we're going to put the motor and gearbox back together. We're going to put the starter motor on, and distributor in, alternator on, all sorts of componentry to make the whole thing a unit ready to go into the car. Now, the first thing I'll have to do is the clutch. There's a shaft that goes through the bell housing that works the clutch, the bearing and what have you. That needs to be put back in, and well, I'll show you something. This is a shaft that goes through the bell housing. There's a couple of bushes like either end. I replaced them not all that long ago, so they should be right. There's a pin holds a fork that works the bearing, comes up through here. But what's been happened here is where this goes on there, works the clutch. These holes were elongated, and therefore the welder welded them up and re-drilled a hole. All I wanted him to do was to weld them up so I could re-drill the hole. Well, he's done that, which creates a bit of a problem for me, because if I'd re-drilled the hole, I could have drilled the hole to suit the pin that I have. Now I've got to find a pin to fit the hole. Anyway, that's the next job. Get the gearbox and motor back together, auxiliary items on, generally find everything. Now how this is going to go in, it's not the normal way I do it. I have done it in the past this way, but normally the motor just comes out the top. Because the subframe's out, I'll wheel the motor under the car, hoist it up with the hoist, then using just a trolley jack the subframe up underneath that, bolt the subframe in, and then lower the engine down onto the subframe. It's a reasonably, I have done it, but it's an alright way to do it when you got the subframe out. Alright, let's get on with it. Now, these things have a habit of seizing himself onto that shaft. I think the first time I ever pulled the gearbox out of a dolly, this was frozen on. I wasn't doing the job, I was just like helping the mechanic, and he cut this shaft off, and I had to try and find another one. So since then I've tried to keep them well lubricated with this various sorts of anti-seize goo. And I'll put the new bearing on. Did that some time ago as part of my having nothing to do during the lockdown in preparation for doing this job. This fork thing sort of corroded itself to the shaft, but this pin that I'm currently trying to put in also can snap off, and you'll have no clutch, and they can also corrode themselves in, and so when you go to undo them, they sort of shear off. British Leyland or Triumph must have been worried that these would come undone or something, or maybe they had trouble with them at some point. Can't say British Leyland or Triumph are known for fixing problems. They just let the problem run for entire run of the car. So I find that hard to believe that they had it happen in testing or something and decided to fix it. But they must have had some idea that this was going to be a problem area, in as much as this pen is wired. I've got a piece of wire through a hole so that it doesn't come undone. Going on my experience, it ain't ever coming undone. It's just got a square section head on it, so it have to use a shifter. Alrighty, let's get on with it. Now this, I've owned this car for, I think I would have said, for a very long time. And over that time, I've learnt various tricks, if you like. Now, in the early time of ownership of a dolly, I found out how difficult the clutch arrangement is. This is bolted on here on the gearbox. Once it's in the car, getting to those bolts is one hell of a mission, and to bleed them, the clutch, is also one hell of a mission. So I have got round the problem. What happens is, you got to take this bracket off because you can't get the clutch off without it. Now, I have made a race dolly at one point, which is a great shame. I had to get rid of it, but oh well. It's part of life's rich tapestry. Now, whoever owned the car before me, obviously a person after my own heart, had got round the problem a little bit different. They'd cut a hole in the side of the sort of in the car, in the cover that covers the gearbox. Now I must admit, or maybe it was just a later model dolly and the Poms had done it already. But you could sort of pull the carpet back and take this big grommet, and it was a big sucker, out, and you could get to here to at least bleed the brakes. And I don't know if you could get to those bolts. I don't remember. Didn't work on that car much in the years I owned it. I tried replacing these bolts here with Allen headed bolts, but that didn't make it any easier. So it's gone back to just bolts now. Anyway, the problem you have with bleeding these is that the bleed nipple needs to be on top. So with that bolted on like that, that one needs to be the bleed nipple. but when you bolt the hose that goes to the master cylinder on, it loops out and covers it. And you can't get your hand up. It's now a lot of people turn it up the other way and then it won't bleed. You know, you pump and pump away. I think if you got one of those vacuum bleeders or one of them pressure bleeders or whatever they call them, you might be able to do it, but I've never had one of them, so that never happened. Now I've got round the problem by putting this hose on. Now this hose, just put it upside down, but don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. This hose becomes the bleeder hose. That goes down and that bolts to the cross member down under the gearbox. And you can get to that dead easy. Now this is just a T-piece out of a dolly, that or a car, I think it was a dolly, that I'd wrecked out. And I had to put another bleed, so there's two bleeds, but that's only because I needed to clog one up. And it's now sort of considerably easier to bleed the clutch. So that was my solution to having the problem of bleeding the clutch on the dolly. So yeah, this is the bleed hose, and it's going into the top sort of connector on the slave cylinder. Now I absolutely hate these fittings that I'm currently using. That's why in a lot of cases on this car, and I've converted everything over to this style of fitting, because I really have had my fill of the years of fighting with these sort of connectors, particularly on brakes, the smaller ones on brakes. Oh my goodness. And it was probably economics that did it when car makers decided to do this, but maybe the tech wasn't there at the time, I don't know. But you rarely have trouble with these style of connectors. Well, sometimes in life you're just plain lucky. I found a pin that's the right size. I thought I was going to have a lot of trouble with that one. One of the great problems with, and I'm grateful, the facts of life are I can't get anything for that stupid Toyota out there. Well, it's not stupid, but like, you know, I can buy a distributor cap for the next model along that will fit on the distributor, but I can't buy leads to suit. I can buy leads to suit the current distributor cap, which I've done, but I can't buy a distributor cap to suit the current, that actual model sort of thing. And well, they're different enough that it all doesn't work. So, and I can't seem to make it work. Now with reproduction parts that you get for Triumphs, I'm really grateful you can get them. Yeah, the cars are very old, and and the fact that I can get them, and I can't get them for the Toyota, which is a lot newer. But then you run into these problems where they're not quite right. This won't go through the rubber boot on the slave cylinder, and for some reason, first time I've ever seen this, just the end part of this boot seems to be more like a porcelain, like a distributor cap, like plastic. It's got no give. I'm going to have to drill that out. I just love what is, you know, you expect to be the problems, and they don't turn out to be. And the little things turn out to be the problems. That's what adds a considerable amount of time to the process of putting the car together. Well, it's time to get this motor and gearbox together. It's always tricky to get it to line up. The clutch is all lined up. I got an old input shaft, so that was all lined up when I put it together, but now getting this to line up can be a different story altogether. I think that was the simplest one I've ever done. Well, the gearbox is on now, so time to put the starter motor on. Now, I wasn't really prepared when I bought the dolly for a car that's so hard to work on in comparison to the cars I've had before. Now, life started out with minis, both rally car and road car, and yeah, there's jobs on minis that are hard, but my goodness, no comparison to a dolly. Then I rallied a marina for a long time, and it was really quite easy to work on. And now I was quite shocked when I got the dolly how everything is so difficult. The starter motor, when it's in the car, my goodness, it's a nightmare. There's one bolt just up here, nut, and it's a 9/16 bolt, but when it's in the car you need more extensions than this. You need to be right down to the front, and also because of the room you have to go down to 3/8 drive and an extension 3/8 drive. I think I've got the wrong one there, in order to get it on. Yeah, the steering rack is a nightmare to get out when it's in the car. The slave cylinder, which I've already talked about, is a shocker. Yeah, the exhaust manifold. Everywhere you look, it's so difficult. So, and this starter motor weighs an absolute ton. And that all works fine. I was trying to put the distributor back in. Now, this shaft runs off the jack shaft that runs the oil pump, and if it had a fuel pump, the fuel pump, and the distributor, and it goes down in there. Well, that has me puzzled. Seems like that shaft's too long, which it obviously isn't. Oh, I don't know what the hell all that was all about, but it's now just going in the way it should, so we'll go with that. Nothing like a 10-minute job that just took an hour, eh? Dolly. I gotta put the steering rack onto the subframe. Now I've got to have a bit of a look in the engine bay. I think there's a heat shield in there and maybe a couple of things that I will have to do in the engine bay before the engine can go in. But we're getting there. Now normally there'd be a U-bolt arrangement here, and I've welded nuts in there and it's just got a bolt through. And there's also this bracket here that clamps the rack here to this, so it can't move. U-bolts were awful things, just awful. And also when it comes to getting the rack out, getting the U-bolt off hits on components in the engine, so you have to jack the engine up. Now you don't have to do that even though you still have trouble with it all. Now the bolts can't come out. If they do come loose, they can't actually come out because the sump guard's on there and in the way. So anyway, well, that's the mod there. The other bit of a mod here is this bush at the end here often wears a bit. So there's a nut welded to the steering rack, and then another locking nut and a bolt. So you can sort of crush that bush a little bit in case you get wear in there and you're not forever changing that bush then. Well, just about the last job to do to get everything ready to put the engine in is this heat shield, which just pop rivets to the firewall. I took it off to get access to where all the welding was on. So let's get on with that. First thing is to drill out the old pop rivets. In the engine bay, all is done, heat shield's on, everything else is done. Now there's things that, it's a combination of which is easier and which is harder. The power booster's not in, and well, the dash is coming out at some point, and that'll make putting that in a lot easier. And there's some things that are debatable whether they're easier to do now or later. So, well, the dolly's engine and gearbox are ready to go back in, as is the subframe with the steering rack attached, all ready to go back in. Well, that brings us to the end of another exciting episode of restoring this Triumph Dolomite Sprint rally car. Tune in, same duck time, same duck channel, for more mechanical mayhem on the poor old dolly. When you will see, believe it or not, wait for it, the engine and gearbox and subframe going back into the poor old dolly. I never thought I would see the day. I thought it would end up as a garage ornament, incomplete for the rest of its days, but now it'll probably still end up a garage ornament, but at least it might be in one piece. So that's about it from me. Bye for now.